Japan just deployed a missile that can reach Beijing's coastline from a truck in Kyushu, and it happened in March 2026, with almost no global headlines. For the first time since 1945, Japan has a weapon system capable of striking enemy military infrastructure on the mainland before a shot is fired at Japanese soil. Has Japan's Type-12 deployment shifted the military balance in the Pacific, or is this just hardware that looks impressive on paper? To answer that, you need to understand three things: the missile itself, the geography it's designed to exploit, and the Chinese naval access problem it directly attacks. The original Type-12, fielded in 2012, was a coastal defense weapon with a 200-kilometer range, roughly the distance from London to Paris. Useful for keeping hostile ships away from Japan's shoreline. Not much else. China's defense planners barely blinked. The improved Type-12, the one rolling into Camp Kengun in Kumamoto right now, has a confirmed range targeting 900 to 1,000 kilometers, with a future variant aimed at 1,500 kilometers. That's not a coastal defense weapon anymore. That's a strike weapon. The difference is like going from a shotgun that protects your front porch to a rifle that covers your entire neighborhood. On one side of this equation, Japan, which in December 2025 completed its final live-fire test series in Southern California, 7 launches between October and November, and formally declared the land-based variant development complete. It then began actual deployments. On the other side, China, whose navy depends on specific narrow maritime corridors to move from the East China Sea into the open Pacific. Block those corridors, and the PLA Navy's entire blue water expansion strategy gets complicated. The geography that sits between those two facts is called the Miyako Strait, and it's where this story gets genuinely interesting. The upgraded Type-12 is not one system. It's a networked kill chain on wheels. Each launcher truck carries 8 missiles in armored canisters. The vehicle can deploy, fire, and reposition before a retaliatory strike could be plotted. That mobility is deliberate. It's what makes the system survivable in a contested environment where satellite targeting is fast and counter-battery fire is real. The Seeker is a K-band active electronically scanned array radar, the same Seeker class Japan uses in its beyond visual range air-to-air missiles. In plain terms, it sees through clutter, discriminates between decoys and real targets, and homes in at the terminal phase without needing a data uplink from outside. The guidance chain before that uses inertial navigation, GPS, and terrain contour matching, TERCOM, which means the missile knows where it is by comparing the ground below it to preloaded terrain maps, even if GPS is jammed. The redesigned airframe has a reduced radar cross-section. Think of it this way: the original Type-12 showed up on radar like a bus. The new version is closer to a bicycle in terms of its return signature. It flies low, it's fast, and it can receive mid-course targeting updates from maritime patrol aircraft, surface ships, or satellites, which means if the target moves, the missile can be redirected. It can hit naval vessels, it can hit ground targets, fixed military infrastructure, coastal radar installations, command nodes. Japan's Ministry of Defense has confirmed this dual role explicitly in its defense white paper. That last part is what Beijing's military analysts have been focused on, because it means this isn't just an anti-ship system. It's a potential first strike tool against PLA coastal military assets, precisely the kind of capability Japan didn't have 3 years ago. Stay with me, because the deployment geography in Chapter 2 is where this becomes a direct threat to China's naval strategy, and I want your read on something before we get there. Can the PLA Navy maintain its Pacific breakout strategy if the Miyako Strait is under persistent Type-12 coverage? The Miyako Strait is a 250-kilometer wide passage in Japan's Ryukyu Island chain, the gap between Miyako Island and Okinawa. It's one of the very few deep water corridors the PLA Navy can use to move large warships from the East China Sea into the Philippine Sea and then into the open Pacific without going through Japanese territorial waters. China has used this passage repeatedly. In 2021, a PLA carrier group passed through it. In 2024, multiple naval task forces did the same. Every time, Japan scrambled surveillance assets. Every time, there was nothing Japan could do militarily to stop the transit, because China's ships were in international waters. The Type-12 changes that calculus, not because it can legally stop a peacetime transit, but because it creates a threat envelope that sits over that strait at all times. From Camp Kengan in Kumamoto on Kyushu, the upgraded Type-12 cannot quite reach the Miyako Strait at its current stated range. But from positions on the Ryukyu Islands themselves, Yonaguni sits just 110 kilometers from Taiwan. The missile's coverage arc places the entire strait, China's eastern coastline, and parts of the Taiwan Strait within range. An International Institute for Strategic Studies analysis published in January 2025 confirmed this geometry explicitly. Japan is also deploying to Camp Fuji in Shizuoka in 2027 and has announced sites in Hokkaido and Miyazaki. 4 deployment locations, overlapping range arcs. In a Taiwan contingency scenario, wargame projections suggest that coordinated Type-12 salvos from island chain positions could force PLA carrier groups into narrower, more predictable corridors, exactly where U.S. submarine and air assets would be waiting. The PLA's anti-access strategy was built on the assumption that no regional power except the U.S. could project lethal standoff capability this far. That assumption is no longer valid. What China has said publicly about this tells you almost nothing. What they've actually done in response tells you everything. China's official response to the Type-12 deployment has been consistent and loud. The state media called it military expansion. The Global Times quoted a Beijing-based military expert saying the early deployment exposes Japan's ambition. China's foreign ministry condemned Japan's plan to station a surface-to-air missile unit on Yonaguni Island as stoking confrontation. Loud condemnations are what you do when you're worried and don't have a clean countermove. Here's what the public statements don't mention. The Type-12's networked architecture means the kill chain doesn't depend on a single sensor or a single launcher. Japan's Joint Operations Command, established in March 2025, specifically to coordinate real-time standoff operations, connects Type-12 batteries to satellite reconnaissance, maritime patrol aircraft, and Aegis destroyers. Jamming one link doesn't break the chain. China's primary answer to this kind of threat has historically been its DF-series ballistic missiles, the DF-21D, the so-called carrier killer, with a range around 1,500 kilometers. But the Type-12 launchers are mobile, dispersed, and low signature. You can't pre-target a truck that moves after every salvo. The PLA's land attack precision strike doctrine was built around fixed, high-value targets. Mobile coastal missile batteries are a different problem. There's also the submarine dimension. Japan's new Taige-class submarines are designed to fire a submarine launch derivative of the Type-12 family. A Taige boat can sit in the Philippine Sea, largely outside the PLA's dense anti-submarine envelope, and launch standoff strikes against Chinese surface groups moving through the Luzon Strait. Japan plans to deploy that submarine-launched variant in 2027. At that point, the threat closes from multiple vectors simultaneously. What China hasn't disclosed, whether its existing coastal air defense systems, primarily the HQ-9 and S-400 batteries, have been repositioned in response to the extended Type-12 range envelope. Satellite imagery from late 2025 suggests activity at several coastal radar sites in Fujian and Guangdong provinces, but China's defense ministry has not confirmed or discussed any of it. Silence from a government that usually narrates every defense move in detail is its own kind of signal. Yes, Japan's Type-12 deployment has genuinely shifted the Pacific military balance. not because a single missile system wins wars, but because it closes a gap that China's entire regional naval strategy depended on staying open. 3 implications for where this goes from here. First, the island chain is becoming a missile battery. Japan's 4 Type-12 deployment sites, Kumamoto, Shizuoka, Hokkaido, and Miyazaki, aren't randomly chosen. They're positioned to create overlapping range arcs across every major corridor the PLA Navy uses to reach the Pacific. Layer on top of that, the U.S. Marine Littoral Regiments, now exercising land-based anti-ship roles in the Philippines with the Naval Strike Missile, and you have 2 separate allied nations building the same architecture simultaneously along the same island chain. This isn't a Japanese story anymore. It's a coalition anti-access story. And coalitions are much harder to plan around than a single adversary, because you can't assume coordinated gaps the way you could with one country's deployment logic. This is structural, not temporary, and it compounds every year new systems come online. Second, the 2027 submarine-launched variant will be the real threshold event. Here's why it matters more than the land-based version. Truck launchers, however mobile, are still tied to road networks, coastal geography, and satellite detection windows. A Taige-class submarine running on lithium-ion batteries, which let it stay submerged longer and quieter than any previous Japanese diesel-electric boat, has none of those constraints. It can sit in the Philippine Sea, which is largely outside the PLA's reliable anti-submarine envelope, and launch Type-12 derivatives against Chinese surface groups from a position that's genuinely hard to find and harder to preempt. When that variant deploys, the threat against PLA naval movements stops being 2-dimensional. It becomes 3-dimensional. Watch the 2027 deployment announcement closely. That's the capability shift that closes the last remaining gap in Japan's standoff kill web. Third, Japan is not done, and the timeline accelerates sharply. The Hypervelocity Gliding Projectile Block 2, projected to enter service around 2030, carries a range estimate of 3,000 kilometers. That puts targets across virtually all of China's eastern military infrastructure within reach from Japanese home islands. No forward deployment required. Before that, the HVGP Block 1 arrives in 2026 with a 500-kilometer range, and a new domestic precision anti-ship missile began development in fiscal 2024 with no announced ceiling on its range ambitions. Japan isn't adding one capability. It's building interlocking layers, land, sea, subsurface, and eventually hypersonic, on a timeline that compresses faster than most Western analysts expected even 2 years ago. The question for you: when Japan fields the submarine-launched Type-12 in 2027 alongside its Tomahawk-equipped destroyers, does the first island chain become a hard barrier that genuinely contains PLA naval expansion? Or does China find a way through that we're not seeing yet? Drop your scenario in the comments. Subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this.